Well, let's go ahead and get started tonight. Heavenly Father, tonight, again, as we come into your presence, and we ask you to bless us today, open our hearts to receive what you have for us. And Lord, I pray you will anoint your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things you'd have me to say. Anoint our hearts to receive. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're getting ready to go into chapter 17 and 18 tonight. And this is, on the surface, this looks like a really confusing two chapters. And this is possibly two of the most confusing chapters in the book of Revelation that we're going to look at tonight. And it's because, one reason is because the symbolism is so unique, so different, and if whoever you talk to, everybody's got a different idea of what this is. So you're going to get Alanese tonight. This is my opinion of what it's all about. And if you hear somebody you like better, well, that's fine too. But I think I've looked at a lot of commentaries and gone through a lot of stuff, and this to me this makes the most sense. It fits into what we've been looking at from the different views of Revelation. Now remember, we're looking here at the economic part of the kingdom. And last week, we looked at the beasts and we looked at all of that. And it may appear like we're looking at it from a political standpoint, but actually when we get into the into the 18th chapter, all of that will start to make sense, and we can see now how it actually was commerce that we were looking at. And we're going to see that even more so tonight. So let's start reading at Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 and 2. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Now, it's kind of interesting that it's one of the angels that had the bowls that's going to show this to John. And I think this kind of points to the fact that the seven bowls, were the woes, and these were the top, or the worst, I guess you could say, judgments. These, in God's eyes, this was just the judgment was on a completely corrupt system, and it's one of those angels. And so I think that kind of tells us where God puts this judgment of this harlot, this whore. So he's definitely, he definitely wants to judge this whore, this harlot. And the angel, his purpose is to show the judgments of the great harlot. Now we look at her, and she sits on many waters. Now waters, remember, is the symbol of nations or groups of people. In other words, Gentiles actually is what it focuses down to, but it can also mean just many nations. It's out of a big array of nations, which is really what Gentiles are. So she sits, or she sits on many waters. Now I've heard some commentaries say that this is one vision, and then the next couple of verses down is another vision, but I don't think so. I think it's the same idea, that being that this harlot is being supported by all of these nations. It's what makes her what she is are the nations who have supported her, and we'll see that as we go along here. And it says here, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Now this, we look at that and we understand fornication in God's vernacular is idolatry. It's putting anything before Him. So what they have done is, by the means of this harlot, they have put other things before God. And so they have committed fornication because she has replaced God. Now this is going to be a little tough for some people maybe watching the video, but we're going to get into some pretty controversial things, but I think I can back up pretty much what we're talking about here. And it becomes abundantly clear when we look at this from the viewpoint of economics. All right. Notice this, it says the inhabitants were made drunk by the fruits of her idolatry. The fruits or the wine of her idolatry. In other words, they became rich. They became, you know, when people become rich, I've noticed one thing that they do is they kind of lose their sanity in some ways. I mean, you look at rich people, I mean, they can be just normal people, and then all of a sudden they get rich, or they earn money, and what happens? All of a sudden, their whole mindset changes, and they become, you know, obsessed with money, or they become obsessed with something else. I really see it in athletes. You see athletes who, you know, they've had to scratch and fight their way through, you know, to really be good. And then they get up and all of a sudden maybe they're professional basketball players, and they turn around and they got millions in the bank, and everybody's falling down and worshiping them. And look what happens. Next thing you know, they're picked up for shooting somebody or getting in a fight at a casino at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, when before they were rich, would they have been at a casino at 3 o'clock in the morning? Or would they, you know, no. They just lose their sense of direction, and they become, you know, just so intoxicated. To me, it's almost, they become almost like a drunk person. They just can't reason things out anymore. And so that's the picture here that the prophet is showing about those that have drunk of the wine of her fornication. And we're going to look at this, and this is riches, this is fame, this is these nations that have been committing fornication with her have tasted of the riches that she offers. And notice it doesn't say nations here, it says kings. We're looking at the leaders of these countries. And as we go through, I may point out a few of them, especially South American countries and those that are more closely aligned with this idea. All right, so that's what this angel is going to present, is this harlot. All right, verse 3 through 6. Excuse me. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. Now, this idea of sitting in the wilderness here is a Greek word, and it means eremos, which means separated from those who supported her. And I'm giving you the more specialized look at it, as Thayer's does. This indicates that she has been separated. She's in the wilderness. Notice up until this time, we've been looking at cities, we've been looking, more at the kingdom itself and what's. Now, the Spirit takes John out to the wilderness, out to a place where she is alone. So we're looking at her, not in her glory when she was doing it, But now we're looking at her as she has been separated. All right, and we'll continue this idea as we go along here. Now, because of the bold judgments, the harlot is now separated from those who supported her. You remember all those 7 bold judgments that came down on everything. Where did that happen? Last 3.5 years, right? So what we're looking at now is the harlot. That has up until this time been the pusher of the economies of the world. And the one who really, and we'll talk about it more in a minute here, but what we're seeing in this verse is that now at this 3.5 year mark, she's now separated. And the bold judgments are coming down on that 3.5 year period, and she has now been shuttled off and separated. And we're going to see how badly that is for her in just a minute. Now, what is she sitting on? Now, we first saw her sitting on waters, right? Many nations. Well, now we see her in the wilderness sitting on this beast. And of course, that is the beast kingdom that we've looked at already. You know, the same one. It's the last Gentile empire. It's the beast kingdom with the 7 heads and 10 horns. And all. This is the same character here, or the same symbol. So that hasn't changed. Only now we see it as red. All right, so it's a red beast. Scarlet beast. And that scarlet, by the way, is a bright red color that's brighter than crimson, which is a red color that's tinged a little with blue. So this is really red. Now, scarlet has symbolized wealth and power, both politically and religiously, since ancient Bible times. It's second only to purple. It was a status symbol in the mighty Roman Empire. Officers in Rome's army wore cloaks dyed in it, as well as high-ranking non-military people. The flag carried by the Crusaders during the Middle Ages displayed a cross with this same scarlet pigment. So what we're looking at here is a symbol, or the idea of the scarlet is that it is power, authority. Now, this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the same one we saw in chapter 13. Now, this is the revised Roman Empire, or kingdom of the Antichrist. Okay? At the 3.5 year mark. Let me add that in there. So he has come to power here on the old Roman Empire. Now, this woman is arrayed in scarlet, purple, adorned in gold, precious stones and pearls. So she's got all of this wealth. Now, purple denotes royalty and power. Gold, precious stones and pearls, of course, denote wealth and riches. So this woman who sits on this beast is wealthy. She has a certain amount of royalty to her. She's rich. And these are the predominant colors of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, some commentaries, they take this to the extreme. Everything in the book of Revelation is against the Roman Catholic Church. This is the only place I can find, I think, where we see the Roman Catholic Church denoted, and it's the harlot. It's the harlot. And you say, what's that got to do with economics? Well, we'll cover that here in just a moment. Now, she holds in her hand a golden cup that are full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. This is apostasy and idolatry. When you look at the Catholic Church, they introduced the separation of saints and leadership. When we look at the early church, there was no separation between the apostles or the pastors or the people in the church. It's like we have here, they're all together. We have those positions of leadership, but they're not separated. You don't have to call and make an appointment to walk up to Pastor Rick and say hi, for instance. You know what I mean? He's here. You don't find that in the Roman Catholic Church in its leadership. They separated the laity from the priesthood or from the leadership. And you had to, if you're they introduced the idea of the monks, complete separation so that they could get a better feel for God, and they could be scribes, and they had this place that was above everybody else. They introduced the nuns, the sisters, and these are, of course, devout, separated to God. The priests, they can't marry, celibacy, and separated. It was this idea of separation. It's one of the things that God hated in the churches when he talked about the Nicolaitans, because that's what they taught, was separation. And God said, I hate that. Jesus, he taught just the opposite. That if you want to be a leader in the church, you first have to be a servant. And when you're a servant, now you're the leader. And if you're the leader, you're a servant. If you're not a servant, you're not a leader. That's what he taught. And he demonstrated that every day. And so we first of all see this idea of separation. There's the worship of Mary. There's nowhere in that book that it ever says we should worship Mary. Certainly never pray to Mary. And yet, and the Catholic, they will say, well, we don't really pray to her. And yet, if I understand the rosary correction, it says, Hail Mary, full of grace, blessed art thou amongst women, blessed art thou, and they go through this, and bless us now. What are you doing? You are praying. And you go into the Catholic churches, you'll see more pictures and statues of Mary than you do Jesus. And by the way, Jesus is always on the cross. You don't see the empty cross. That's significant, because they never see the resurrection, the idea that Jesus can live within you. He's on the cross. Exterior, not interior. And this, of course, the Apostle Paul, he took that apart. That was his big... if I don't know anything else, it's the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel. And yet they have backed that back so that we see Jesus on the cross, and we see Mary with her bleeding heart and all of that, and we can pray to Mary. But Jesus, he's on the cross. Sainthood. I got news for them. I don't know where they get this idea that one person's a better saint than the other, or whether they're because of something they did here. Mother Teresa, I think, is up for sainthood if they haven't already sainted her, because she was a wonderful person and took care of the sick, and I think that is fantastic for somebody who can do that. But to say all of a sudden, because she did that, she can now be a saint, and you can pray to her, and she will watch over you, and she will bless you. That's fornication in the eyes of God. That is idolatry, pure and simple. You remember we talked about the idols of Canaan. They had the master god, the head god, but then they have all of these little gods, that are the funnel or the channel through which this big God can operate. And so you have your own God, and you pray to him, whether it's Baal or Ashtaroth or whoever it is, and then they will bless you through that is idolatry. That's what God hates. That's what's bringing all of this judgment to bear, is idolatry. Not just the worship of an idol, but the worship of anything that takes the place of God. Let's move along. Purgatory. That's a good one. You don't go to heaven or hell, you go to purgatory. And you can sit in purgatory and you can be the worst sinner on the face of the earth. But if your family raises enough money, then the priest can absolve that sin and you can go to heaven. That's purgatory. And that's exactly how the Catholic Church operates. In fact, that is one of the things that caused Martin Luther to leave the church, the Catholic Church, and start the Lutheran. Because what he found was there was a guy from Rome that they sent out because they needed some money. He was going around selling absolutions. So you could buy the money for your dead dad who was, a scoundrel. You could buy an absolution and he would make it to heaven. And they were making big bucks selling absolutions. And when they came around to Luther, he said this, I don't find that. I find where this says, the just shall live by faith, not by your money. That was the final straw that caused him to back out and put his theses on the door in Germany. And I want to say something about that too, while I'm thinking about it. That was what caused Israel, the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes, that was why they were destroyed and completely spread out over the face of the earth. When you read it, it wasn't their idolatry as much as it was the fact that their leadership was stealing from the poor. They were taking money from the poor. They were exacting money from them for their favors. Exactly the same thing as the priests are doing. Jesus, when he drove the money changers out, why was he driving the money changers out? Because they were selling sheep and then to the poor, or the doves to the poor, and when they go to the priest say, we can't offer this because it's spotted. So they'd sell it to the next person. That's what was going on in the temple. Money changers. They turned the house of God into a place of commerce. And so that's what this whole business here in the 17th and 18th chapters are about. It's about the commerce. It's about how they sold things, how they used the idolatry to raise funds and to spread this business of idolatry. And probably the worst of all things is that priests can forgive sins. When you go into the confessional and you sit before the priest and you confess, he will say, well, you go and put $10 in the thing and then your sins are absolved. Where does that come from? I never once saw Peter, James, John, any of them ever tell anybody your sins are forgiven. The only people that said your sins are forgiven was Jesus. They're not Jesus. And yet they act like Jesus. They try to be Jesus. And everything is their wealth. All right. Her name is Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth. I don't know how you can make it any plainer. That's pretty plain words of what God thinks about this mystery. And I think the reason it's called a mystery, when you think about it, it came out of Christianity, out of the early church. And this really took the form in about 300 AD, when it finally blossomed out into what we see today with the Pope and All of that happened in the about 300 to 312 BC. That's when the Constantine merged the Catholic Church and all of this and formed the Catholic Church. It's the first place it was called Catholic Church. Anyway, that was about 300 AD. And that was a mystery. How could this beast come out of the Apostolic Church? That's a mystery. How in the world could this terrible mess that the Catholic Church is in, how did that happen? How was that twisted out of the early Apostolic Church? And of course there are some of the saints that were responsible for this. And when you look at their teachings, they were actually teachings that came out of the pagan world. And so what happened here was really nothing different than what we saw in the nation of Israel. You remember when we were going through that, the 10 tribes, they started their own, because they didn't go to Jerusalem, so they had two places that they had their temples, and they introduced the golden calves, and they introduced the priesthood that was not from the line of or lineage of Aaron, and they had all of this stuff by introducing pieces of idolatry into the what was then the Jewish faith, Hebrew, and that became such a idolatrous mess that God had to finally just wipe them all out, or as far as the nation was concerned. And so we have the same thing here. I will just mention this. Constantine, when he came to power, he was of course the Roman emperor at the time. He merged Christianity with paganism. He was also a pagan high priest. Now, up until this time, Rome had the idea of emperor worship, and the Caesars were the gods. He went into paganism, and so he introduced paganism, married that with Christianity. That's where we get the Council of Nicaea in 312. That's where they came up with the idea that Father, Son, and Holy Ghost sat down, and decided which one was going to come down to the earth. I mean, it's really quite a elaborate thing, which is all ridiculous because you can't have any more than one entity in eternity, because there's no time, there's no cause and effect. But anyway, that's a scientific thing. But this whole thing came about because you had Ashtaroth, you had El, and you had Baal. And they had took on different names. Ashtaroth was the queen of heaven. El was the supreme god of the Canaanites. And then you had Baal, who was the god of fertility, or not so much fertility as soil and agricultural fertility is what I'm talking about. Ashtaroth was the god of fertility. And she was the queen of heaven and the king of heaven, and you had and Baal was considered their offspring. Anyway, this whole concept was brought into Christianity. We didn't have that concept before. Nowhere. You don't find it anywhere in the scriptures, that context and that idea. People have taken and formed it to that idea and tried to force it in with a shoehorn, but it just doesn't fit when you really look at it. And that all came about through Constantine. So from that, we have Christmas on the 25th of December, which happened to be a pagan holiday. We have Easter. Again, it was the rites of spring, and we have Easter bunnies, and we have Easter eggs, and we have Christmas trees, and all of this stuff. It all came about through Constantine and his introduction of all of this stuff into religion. Now, I'm not saying we don't have Christmas trees, and don't make a mistake there. I'm not saying that at all. But what is this thing doing? This is interesting. My machine's going crazy on me here, doing all kinds of crazy things. Okay. All right. Home. Now I'm getting marks every time I touch anything. Well, we'll just proceed. If I can find where I was. Okay, here we go. All right. Bear with me a minute. This thing has decided to just go with bananas on me. All right. Now she's pretty well pointed out here when it says she is drunken with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Nobody killed more saints, more Christians than the Catholic Church. Nobody. Not Rome, under the emperors. No one has killed more Christians than the Catholic Church. The Inquisition alone in France, if you didn't profess to be a Roman Catholic, they killed you. Period. That was the end of the discussion. The Crusaders, they would come through. If you didn't profess Catholic, that you were a Catholic, I mean, that was, you were considered the same as a Mohammedan or an Islamic, and you were killed right now. And it goes on today. South America, persecution down there for Christians is still very, very high, and it's the Catholic Church that's perpetuating that. When you look over the ages, they have been the #1 killer of Christians. It kind of opens your eyes a little bit when they say, we're Christian. How can you be Christian and kill Christians? Anyway, so, and they're also, well, we've covered that. Now notice this, John marveled at the woman. John didn't marvel at very much that he saw, but this was one thing he marveled at. And I think the marveling came from what I said earlier. How in the world could this come about? How could this happen? How could the Christianity be so debased by this time? And of course, he's looking into the future. He's not seeing it like we see it. And so to him, this had to be something that was, you know, it's like a kid growing up. You know, you see him over here, you watch them grow up and you don't notice, but if you see a child when they're little and then you come back 30 years later, wow, what happened, you know? And that's kind of John. He sees the early church, he sees what it's gone into. That had to be a tremendous shock to him. All right, let's take a look at the meaning of the beast and the woman. Oh, no, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. Yeah, the meaning of the beast and the woman. Verses 7 to 18. But the angel said to me, why did you marvel? Why are you marveling at this? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. When they see the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which is wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was, and is not, is himself also the 8th, and is the 7, and is of the 7, going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. All right. Kind of confusing. But we know this beast was and is not and yet is. And we talked about that already. This is the Roman Empire that was, it was sort of defeated, but really never was defeated. It just kind of went off into nowhere. But there was one segment of the Roman Empire that is still here today. It's still operating, not in the city of Rome, but in the nation of the Vatican. It is the only part that was left over from the Roman Empire that has leadership. And we'll go into some of the history on this. I hope I don't bore you with some of this, but we'll get into it here in a minute. All right. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. Now, there are some that would tell you, well, Rome was built on 7 mountains, so that must be what it is. Well, that's not necessarily proven that it was 7 mountains. And even if it was, it wouldn't fit the context of what we're talking about here. So what are the 7 mountains? Now, this gets really interesting, because there were 7 forms of Roman government. 7 forms of Roman government. So what we're looking at here, we see this beast with these 7 horns. It's not all current. It represents how this beast grew, or how this beast was formed. Okay? Does that make sense to you? We're just not looking at 7 countries that are all at one time. It's actually how this beast was formed. So we look at it, and there was 7 of them. The first one were the kings. Roman Empire started with kings, just like any other nation would. But then it moved to a republic, which is similar to what we have, actually, elections and that sort of thing. It moved from that into a council of 10, in which there were 10 leaders that actually ruled Rome, or world, their empire. They were not a huge empire at this time, but it was just, they were growing, baby steps coming along. They went from that to the tribunes, in which were groups. And they went from the tribunes to the dictators. And this is where we see Caesars. This was where they were really the large empire, of Rome, as we think about it in Jesus' day. This was where you had these absolute dictators. Well, they moved from that into something called imperial, or principate. And this was actually the time of Jesus. We still have the Caesars, but the Caesars did not have absolute power at that time, because they had the Senate. And it was actually, when you look at it, it was formed very much like we have today. They had the legislative part of it, which was the Senate. They had the judicial part of it, in which they had their court system. And they had a very unique and very powerful court system. You remember Paul, when they brought him in, they were going to beat him, and he says, you can't, because I'm a Roman citizen. I have to go before a Roman judge before you can do anything. And then, of course, you had the what we would call our presidential or our administrative part, and that was their Caesars in that day. So Rome had kind of backed away from the dictatorship at this time and had this form of government. Well, they moved from that to something called the Exarchat of Ravenna. And this happened because Rome had degenerated to the point where the pagans came in, a pagan army, and actually captured Rome. So what they did is they moved the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to what was known, they actually changed the name to Constantinople. That's in Turkey. And so, anyway, they ruled from that position for a period of about, I want to say 300 years, but I'm not positive on the dates on that. Anyway, then what happened is the seat of power was, Rome by this time had pretty well dissipated down to where it was, still had some power but not a lot. The seat of power was then moved from there to what is today the Vatican. And that was the center or the ruling part of the Roman Empire at its decreased size. All right. What's interesting is it still held all of the economic wealth of the original Roman Empire. All right. So, when we look at this, it says here that the first 5 have gone away. First 5 horns are no more. That was the first 5 horns, or the first 5 forms of government. The 6th, which was this idea of the imperial, that was the one that is. In other words, that's what John was under. That form of Roman government. The other 2 then came later. So that's how we get the 7th. The last one, the 8th one, is very interesting because it was one of the original 6, but it became the 8th because it was originally in Rome. It was set up in Rome, and then went along with it. It was a originally it was a religion, of course, but it also was what was handling the economics of Rome. It was what was, we see how and I'll throw this in. Rome sent their priests wherever, on all of these exploring ships and whatever else. And so when they came into a country, what happened? They would stake it, and it was Rome's. And so the priest, what would he do? He would set up church, and we see this in California with the missions. You go down the missions. Of course, this was hundreds of years later, I realize, in the 1700s. But they would set up what happened then is they taught everybody to bring tithing, giving gifts and offerings, so that would all come to the Catholic Church. What did they do? They sent it all to Rome or to the Vatican. So it was a source of income, and of course we're looking 1700s. The same idea was going on back in the 300s, 400s, AD. This is how they were financing a lot of the empire, was through the Catholic Church. Is this starting to make some sense to you? Okay, and of course, again, this was an abomination to God, because the money that came in should have went to the service and work of God, not to go back to finance the empire. And this sounds really out there, but when you go look at history books, or in fact, if you can even see it on some of the movies they have, you'll see this very idea where the bishop or the cardinal and the king get together. It was very evident in the 1400s in France, where the cardinal actually had more power than the king of France. And you see that in the book Three Musketeers. If you read that book, it's in there, and it's easy to say, well, that was fiction. No, that wasn't fiction, that part of it. Actually, the cardinal had more power than the king, because it was felt that king, he could handle the temporal thing, but that cardinal, he had the ability to, he could just snap his fingers, and not only would you die, but you'd just be lost in hell forever. So they carried that sway with them. And anyway, that's what led to the Inquisition, for instance, of getting rid of the kings. That all came from Catholicism, because they wanted to have absolute power in France, and the only way to do it was to get rid of the kings and the royalty. So, I mean, we're looking at a very, very corrupt system here. And I want to say this, I'm not pointing fingers at any individuals. I mean, if somebody is a Catholic, I know some Catholics that are excellent Christians. I mean, they put us to shame. They outpray us, they outwork us, they go to more services than we go to. They love God as much or more than we do, frankly. But I'm talking about the system as a whole. All right. I want to read this to you. I don't want to drive you nuts, but in 324, the ancient city of Byzantium was renamed New Rome and was declared the new capital of the Roman Empire by Emperor Constantine the Great, after whom it was renamed and dedicated on the 11th of May in 330, and that's Constantinople. From the mid-5th century to the early 13th century, Constantinople was the largest and wealthiest city in Europe. The city became famous for its architectural masterpieces, such as Hagia Sophia, the cathedral of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which served as the seat of the ecumenical patriarch, the sacred imperial palace where the Europeans emperors lived, the Galata Tower, the Hippodrome, the Golden Gate of the Land Wells, and opulent aristocratic palaces. The University of Constantinople was founded in the 5th century and contained artistic and literature treasures before it was sacked in 1204 and 1453, including its vast imperial library, which contained the remains of the Library of Alexandria and had 100,000 volumes. The city was the home of the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople and guardian of Christendom's holiest relics, such as the crown of thorns and the true cross. And this is all from Fred Miller. So you can see that when they moved Rome to Constantinople, it wasn't because they were broke. They continued this idea of wealth. All right, now this beast is the 8th. That is one of the 7 previous forms of the Roman rule. The papal state, which is what we have today under the Pope, absorbed the exarchate of Ravenna and became the political religious system that has ruled the Roman Empire ever since. Miller goes on to say this: the empire fell in 476, and he's a historian, by the way, that I'm quoting from. After the fall of Rome, the emperor in Constantinople was able to regain control through a governor he placed in Ravenna, located on the east coast of the Adriatic. This government, since it was isolated from Constantinople, was called an exarchate, meaning an outside rule. Because of the continued marauding of national groups and the inability of Constantinople to protect Rome, the Bishop of Rome appealed to the Frankish kings for protection. Now this is the part I want you to notice. They not only did so, but granted to the papacy the kingdom of the Lombards and the exarchate of Ravenna. By confiscating the region around Rome, the papacy actually did make 3 states into the state of the church and was the 8th form. So in other words, what this is saying, that the Pope basically negotiated, and so he received not only all of the power of Rome that was down to this point, to this in Constantinople, but because they couldn't protect the city of Rome, they moved it back to Rome, but not into the city. They gave the papacy these parts of Rome, and then all of the Exocet, and then parts of the whole of the Lombard. Well, when you flush all of that out, you're looking at a picture of what was left. Vatican is not a city, it is a country. It is the country that is now the seat of the Roman Empire. Obviously not the Roman Empire with the golden leg, or the legs of iron, that ran over everybody. This is the 10 toes, or that mixed with mud, basically, iron mixed with mud, that we see in the statue that that Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 9. So you see, this is what this is from history. This is not a theologian here writing this. This is a history. And that's what happened. The Vatican is now the head of the Roman Empire. Now, obviously, they don't have any armies. Well, they do. They have those little guys in those funny suits, But, they don't really have an army. Anybody could go in and wipe the Vatican out in about 30 seconds, today. There's no army, there's no way to protect it. How in the world has it stayed in power? Well, God has allowed it to stay in power, for one thing. But the other thing is the riches.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nobody is daring to step on the Vatican because they control the world's wealth. Now, there was a time, and I don't know how true it is now, but I know when I was in Bible school, the Bank of America was a Catholic bank. Mm. The proceeds, the profits, all went to the Vatican. I don't know if that's true now because of our laws and stuff. They may have changed that. But that was the largest bank in the United States. How many other banks do they have like that, where the money is actually to the Catholic Church? And then you look at South America. You look at the rulers in South America, and these guys live high on the hog, they're, even the Philippines. You had Marcos there, and Malda with her things full of shoes. But how many of them are really concerned about their country, and how many of them are actually just accumulating wealth? Look at you go through all of those Catholic countries. The people are poor, and the rulers are wealthy. And where is the other share of that going to? Back to the Vatican. And we don't see that, we don't see that because it's not something that anybody is going to go up and raise a big fuss about. They'd be out of work. They'd be fired in a heartbeat. Because even the big news organizations, they understand how this money is being used. It's just one of those phenomenon that has grown, and it's part of our economy. And the world economy is based on this. So what we're seeing here in this picture is this corrupt, extremely corrupt religious system that is also the leader of the world in terms of economies. All right. Notice it says this system will only continue for a short. What does that mean? Remember, we are focusing here on a 7-year period, right? And in the middle of that is the 3.5-year period. So it doesn't mean that this hasn't been going on for thousands of years. What it means is it's only going to continue for a short time. It's only going to continue for 3.5 years. When the Antichrist comes to power, he will come to power riding or carrying the Catholic Church. It will come under the auspices or the support of the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope will stand up and say, this is the man who should be leading the world. Well, if the Pope says it, who is going to turn back? Well, you have, all of a sudden you're going to see all of these countries, France, mostly Catholic, Germany, mostly Catholic, these big, they're all going to get behind it because that's what the Pope said. And especially if he comes out and says, I have a special message from God. Mm-hmm. And I fully believe that's what he will do. And so what will happen then is everybody will get behind this guy, and okay, he comes to power. Now, for 3.5 years, he'll put up with that, because that's what got him to power. Now, what happens at 3.5 years?
His true colors come out.
What's that?
His true colors come out.
His true colors come out, yes. But how do we see that? You remember the false prophet? At the 3.5 year mark, he's going to put up an image, and everybody's going to be forced to worship the beast. What happens to the Catholic Church? They are going to have to be destroyed before the world will turn to the beast. It's going to be just like Nebuchadnezzar. There was no other god that could possibly be worshipped except Nebuchadnezzar in his country. And that's what the beast is going to do. And so when he does that, something's got to give here. And how does that happen? Well, the Antichrist, of course, is not going to have any need for any form of religion except beast worship. Notice this. God will put it in the hearts of the 10 kings that are there, the rulers that are supporting the Antichrist. He's going to put it in their heart to do what? His will. You say God uses, this kind of guys? Yeah, he used Nebuchadnezzar. He used Sennacherib, which was considered one of the worst despots in the entire Old Testament, and he used him. In fact, called him my son. Yeah. So God uses, he always, in fact, usually always uses people to bring about his judgments and his will. So this will be the will of God that this woman is destroyed. And notice it tells us who that is. This woman is that great which reigns over the kings of the earth. We don't have anybody reigning over the kings of the earth. I've heard people say, well, it's going to be New York because that's where the UN is. Well, I'm sorry, the UN doesn't rule over anybody. I mean, they pass stuff and everybody just ignores it. So, you can't say they're ruling over anybody. But the Vatican's a different situation. They rule over these kings and have for centuries. All right, let's move on. Let's look at the fall of Babylon. Now, this is not Babylon the Great. This is Babylon the Great. So we're not looking at the fall of this harlot. We've seen that already. We see what's going to happen to her. They're going to burn her with fire. They're going to eat her up. In other words, she's going to be completely destroyed, and it will be the 10 kings of the Antichrist kingdom or empire that will do that. In other words, they're going to turn on her and destroy her. All right, now, here we go at the end. Now, that was at the end of the first 3.5 years. Now we're looking at the end of the second 3.5 years. We've seen the destruction of the harlot. Now, what's the destruction of the beast that she rides in on? Okay? All right. After these things, notice, after these things. So this is not, we're not going to go back and look at it again from another perspective. This tells us that we're looking at the next time frame here. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having a great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow, for she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. Pretty strong words. I don't want to be around. Okay. All right. Babylon is fallen. Now this angel that comes down announcing this, he has great power, and the earth is lighted with his glory. And he cries with a mighty voice that Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. So who is this angel? I suppose anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's. But since it says that the whole world is lighted by him when he comes down, there's only one personage I can think of that's going to light the whole world. I have seen angels, we've seen angels, and nowhere do any of them light anything. Number one, it comes down. It's not in heaven. We've seen angels in the temple. We've seen angels flying through heaven. But notice this one. Another angel coming down from heaven. It comes down to the earth. Who comes down to the earth at the end of 3.5 years that would illuminate the earth?
Jesus Christ.
Jesus. Now, another angel. Everybody gets hung up on this word angel. Angel means messenger. And what we're looking at here is not the actual battle of Armageddon. We're seeing a messenger that is coming saying, Babylon the Great is defeated. When Jesus comes down, he will defeat Babylon the Great. All right? So what we're seeing here, I think, is a picture of Jesus coming down. We're not interested in the battle. We're not interested in what he does as far as the details. It's just saying Babylon the Great is defeated. I could kind of see, this angel coming down, and it's Jesus, and he's coming down. I like this picture I had on here a minute ago. Let me see if I can get it back.
On horse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here he is coming down. And he lights the whole world up as it lights down as he comes with his cloud and all of his army, and he defeats them. And I can just see him saying, Babylon the Great's defeated. The world empires are defeated. I think he's emotional. I'm sorry, I don't think he's going to come out and say, well, the Babylon's now defeated. I've done my work, Father. No. I think he's going to come down, whoa! We did it! But the whole world will be lit with that. Anyway, before I get hung up here. All right, this is different from Mystery Babylon of chapter 17. Mystery Babylon is a city, according to Revelation 17 and 18. Babylon the Great is the Gentile rule. This is not the city of Babylon, since it will remain desolate forever, according to Jeremiah chapter 50, Isaiah 13, Zechariah 5, 5-1. It may indicate that the capital of the beast kingdom may be in the area of Babylon. We don't know that. I mean, that's a possibility. Of course, that would be probably closer to Iraq and the capital there in Iraq, but I don't know that. I don't know. All right. Notice it says Babylon has become completely desolate. Now, this is almost the same prophecy that was prophesied by Isaiah as to literal Babylon in Isaiah 13, 19-22. So if you want to look at that, Isaiah 13, verse 19-22, it says this, "And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. The hyenas will howl in their citadels, and jackals in their pleasant places. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged." Very similar to what we see pronounced upon this Babylon the Great. Now, it talks about demons and habitation of devils. Demons is an allusion to the common opinion that demons inhabited abandoned cities, old ruins, and deserts. And you might think that's, why would John use that? Well, because he's writing to the 7 churches of his day. If he says this place is going to be inhabited by demons, he's not meaning that they're going to be, evil power is going to No, they understood. It's like today. If we have an old house that somebody got killed in 1752, what do we say about it? It's haunted. I mean, you go down there and you can hear it creaking as they walk down the floor. My house was only built in '84, and you can lay still, you'll hear my floor creaking in the middle of the night, but there ain't nobody walking down it, it's the way it settles. But it's the idea that this was a common opinion or common way of saying something is desolate, it's going to be inhabited by devils. Okay? And when it talks about foul spirits, a hold of every foul spirit. A hold was a watch post or a station. So, that would be where you'd have maybe a garrison or maybe 5 or 10 guards that were overlooking or guarding something. We talked about this in our study of the Gospels, you remember, in Judges, there we go. Where the enemy would have their outpost, and this is where Jonathan climbed the hill and slew all the men in the garrison. Well, that was a watch post or a guard post. And so that was called a hold. So it was a hold of evil spirits. In other words, same idea. When the hold was defeated, when it was empty, when it was, the soldiers were all gone, then it was felt that evil spirits would come in and would be there. Okay, same idea. So what we're looking at here then is the idea that the inhabited cities would be vacant. They'd be completely nobody there. The only people living there would be these devils, and the holes that guarded these places would become empty, and would be the inhabitants would be evil spirits. A cage of every unclean and habitful or hateful bird. That merely means that they would resort there or abide there as if they were in a cage. All the evil birds, not evil birds, but for instance, Isaiah talks about the owls and the ostriches and these kinds of things. These were birds, scavenger birds, for instance, or those that they would be the inhabitants of these cities. In other words, it's only saying everything gets destroyed. That's what it's saying. All right, move on. All right, the whole world has shared in Babylon's fornication and grown rich with her products. And the rulers of the world have shared in her idolatry. The earth's merchants have become rich through the abundance of her wealth. The word abundance here means commonly power. It might here denote influence, though it may also mean number, vanity, and wealth. So what we're seeing here is a picture of how corrupt Babylon was, but how it also corrupted those around her. When we looked at the woman, the one thing I didn't mention was those that her offspring that she had in fornication. These would be those churches that held her basic doctrines. And I mean, you have I don't want to name all of them. I don't think I have to. You probably know who I mean. But they hold a lot of the same things, worshiping saints and all of this kind of stuff. Well, we see the same thing here. We see in Babylon, this beast kingdom, that those that are following her or doing the same thing she is doing, they commit fornication with her. Now notice this, God warns his people to come out of her, my people. Now people have said this is the church. Not the church, church is gone. This is my people, being the Jews. He's saying, out of there, and this is a warning, get out of there. Don't get yourself wrapped up in the beast kingdom, because it is going to be destroyed. You don't have a choice. It's going to happen. They don't want, God does not want them to be partakers of her sins or receive her plagues. Now, if we think back, we remember where the faithful go into Petra for 3.5 years and are protected by God. So this is what this is pertaining to. It's saying, come out of her. In other words, go with the rest of the saints. Go into Petra. Don't go through the plagues. Don't go through the plagues. All right. Now this call to go out, by the way, appears 7 times in Scripture. Isaiah 48:20, 52:11, Jeremiah 58:9, 51:6-8, and Zechariah 2nd chapter 6-7, and 2 Corinthians 6:17-18. So come out from among her is not a church-oriented statement. It is also one to the Jewish people. Also notice that the sins that she has committed over the centuries have reached into the heavens, and God remembers her iniquities. God never forgets. And I keep going back to the saints under the altar, and they're saying, how long, O Lord? It's like, are you going to ever do this? God never forgets. And he will bring vengeance. That's why he says, vengeance is mine. I'm going to do it. You don't worry about it. That's my problem. I got it taken care of. It's going to happen. And notice this. God will reward Babylon even as she rewarded him. Instead of keeping his commandments, we reward God when we keep his commandments, all of his commandments. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And love is a form of reward. Now think about your marriage, whether you're married or your parents. if nobody loves you, do you feel rewarded? No, you feel isolated. You feel nobody cares. You don't get any reward from them. You don't get any feeling of accomplishment. But when you love him, when you keep his commandments, that's saying to God, we love you, we honor you, we reward you for everything you've done for us. And so we reward him by keeping his commandments. Here, because they have not kept his commandments, double. Give them double. The rewards I should have had, give them double judgment for that. Fill her cup of wrath double. And fill her cup of wrath double to what she poured out on Israel. Wow. You think about all the stuff the Gentile nations have done, starting with Babylon and rolling all the way through Hitler and all of these things. God's saying on this last kingdom, I'm going to take all of that, I'm going to put it in a cup, and then I'm going to double it. And that's the wrath you're going to get. Oh, yeah. All right. Now, this principle of double restitution is laid out in Ezekiel 22, verse 4, verse 7, and verse 9. Jerusalem will receive the Lord's hand double for her sins, according to Isaiah 40 and 2. All right, so what about this country, or this nation? Number one, Babylon is full of pride. She pictures herself as a queen. She doesn't feel that she is a widow, but she thinks everybody loves her. This will be this last kingdom. That will be the attitude. She doesn't think she'll ever see sorrow. Nothing could possibly go wrong. I have everything under control. I'm God. I'm emperor. I'm everything. And my kingdom is moving along smoothly with technology. I have my high priest who's doing all these fabulous miracles, and everything is working just fine, and there's never going to be any problems. James 51, 1-6 describes the picture that the rich have of themselves. You can read that at your leisure. Now, Babylon's plagues will come in one day. It's going to be abrupt. It's going to be fast. It's not going to take very long at all for all of it to come crashing down. Death, mourning, famine. She's going to be utterly burned with fire. All in basically one day. Now, I don't think it's a 24-hour day we're looking at, but it's going to be a very, very extremely short time. And in fact, it could be one day. The Battle of Armageddon will probably not last very long. When Jesus and all the saints come roaring down through there, that's not going to be much of a battle. It's just going to be a slaughter. And that will basically wipe out the beast kingdom. Notice it says the God that judges her is strong. If you want to read something, you read Jeremiah chapter 51, verses 1-10, and it talks about Babylon the Great. So you can read that as you have a chance. All right, let's quickly move along. No, I'm going to be late. All right, verses 19-20. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour her judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble. and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots and bodies, and souls of men. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things have become rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas! That great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance, and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads, and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Now, first of all, this is, to me, probably the most powerful scripture that limits the kingdom of the Antichrist to the area of biblical times. Because if all of this destruction came on the entire earth, who are these kings and merchants that are standing afar off so they don't partake of that? You know? So I think what we're looking at here this is a view of the rest of the earth as we know it. These are those that have partnered with her and traded with her. This would be the United States. You know, we have a big trading block with the European market. How about oil coming out of the Middle East? You know, how many countries run literally on that oil? You know, you have all of these things that we're looking at today. And when Babylon falls, when that whole beast kingdom, which at that time will consolidate all of these countries and all of their wealth and all of the stuff that they trade to the world, will be consolidated in one empire. When that falls, people are, you know, they're going to stand back and say, but it's kind of like us today. If China fell, or we couldn't get our goods from China, what would we do? We wouldn't have anything. Everything says made in China. I remember in the 50s and 60s, you used to say made in Japan. Now it says made in China. Well, it would be far worse if the European countries fell. And so that's what we're seeing here. Notice it talks about her, how she lived in her luxury, and she had all of these things. And the merchants and the sailors, all they can do is just stand back and weep. And it's like a stock market that falls. Or, you know, here we got a picture of a woman, you know, throwing dust on her head. I mean, what else are we going to do? I was talking to Scott today. He went with me to pick up this stuff, and we were talking, and you know, everything's going to the Bitcoin, or the whatever they call it, currency.
Crypto.
And what's that?
Cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and I don't know all about it. I haven't paid too much attention to it, except that I know it's something that doesn't exist, but you invest in it, and suddenly you have all of these Bitcoins, which are not really coins. It's just something somewhere that it's accredited to you somewhere, which immediately tells me I'm not interested, thank you. My dollar and cents will do just fine for as long as I'm around. But here we have all these Bitcoins, and I asked him, I said, Scott, do you happen to know where the overseers of these, and he said, well, there is no overseer, you know, this. I said, wait a minute. Somebody somewhere has to keep track of this, right? Where is this being kept track of? And it was a question I guess he'd never thought about. And he said, well, I don't know. And I told him, I said, I'm teaching this tonight. What if those are someplace in Europe and they fall under the kingdom, the beast kingdom, incorporates that. Now he has all of this, whatever it is, coin, Bitcoin, whatever they call it, currency, some kind of digital currency, and he now controls all of that. And he goes down. And all of his banks go down, and all of his servers go down. What happens to the wealth of the world if they've been investing in that?
Well,
You can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. Maybe that's what it's talking about. Digital currency, I don't know. I can't say. But you can see the mess. The world would be bankrupt. Everything from the extravagant to the necessity will remain unsold. Most of this we've already talked about. All right, one thing in here to notice, it says that heaven will rejoice. And by the way, here's just some pictures I threw up there of Babylon's, of the wealth of the Catholic Church. I heard one guy say, here's this cardinal, and he's in one of these poor countries, and so here's this person that has absolutely nothing, and he says, I really feel for you. Come and kiss my golden ring. Yeah, it kind of sums it up. But it says that heaven's going to rejoice. The prophets, the apostles, everybody's going to rejoice at the fall of this kingdom. And then we go to Revelation 21, verses 21, 24. Then a mighty angel took a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city of Babylon shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and all who were slain on the earth. So we have this mighty angel that's going to throw this millstone down on them. Millstones, of course, they were big, that they used to mill grain. And they would put the grain in two millstones, one would be turned on the other, and it crushes off the outside anyway, and grinds it down to a powder like flour. And millstones, the sign of a millstone was also used to denote someone who was being punished or judged. They said they put a millstone around their neck. In other words, they were carrying this judgment, this heavy weight. And so that's what this is, the heavy weight of judgment that's being thrown on them. And thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her. According to Jeremiah 51:64. It's going to be as if Babylon was buried under water and swept away. It's going to be thrown down with violence. It's not going to be around anymore. There's not going to be any life in her, no music, no anything. And all of this they're going to find, and I kind of, in my mind, I can see the millstone grinding, and what comes out is the blood of the saints, the blood of the prophets, those that they martyred. That's all going to become apparent when they go through the judgment from God. Well, I'm a little over. Well, not really, I guess. We got started a bit late. So, any questions? Okay.